We're spending 22 minutes today with Judge Patricia DiMango of the hot court TV show Hot Bench.
Nice to be here. I'm thrilled to be here.
Great to have you
Thank
here.
you. Thank you.
So this court TV show is different than other ones insofar as the format. There are actually 3 judges.
That's correct.
Right.
All the judge shows, actually, except for our show, have one judge on the bench, which is traditional for a trial level. On the appellate level, it's common to have a 3-judge bench. And Judge Scheinlin, Judge Judy, came up with this idea, having visited Ireland at some point, and said, you know what, I think this would be a nice way to add something to this, the core genre shows. And she...
Why Ireland?
She had been there for, I think she was getting an award. And I think that she was there, and of course, like a busman's holiday, so she went and she visited the courthouses there, and she brought back this idea with her. And she implemented it, and it's taken off. People love it. They love the idea that we deliberate with one another.
Right.
Whereas on the other shows, the judge just renders a verdict from the bench, and you really don't know what's behind the thought process there.
But those deliberations are for real. These are small claims cases?
They're small claims cases. We have individuals throughout the country that vet these cases and bring them in. They evaluate the cases. They ensure that they are, real cases, real litigants. We bring them in, and we deliberate because we have different views on the evidence that we hear, on the credibility of the witnesses, and we do it. We're like a little mini jury almost with one another. We bounce the ideas and the law off one another, and then we render a verdict based on the majority.
And I would think people love that, right?
They do.
This goes back to 12 Angry Men. People love to see that inside, behind the scenes, hashing out of legal issues.
They do. They love it. I think people always want an inside view of something that's taboo. You never see the chambers. You never go into a judge's chambers. The thought process behind a judge's verdict is always, secret until it's rendered or unless it's, written decision. And, it's funny because when I get stopped on the street by people, they always say, I love when the 3 of you argue with each other.
That's their favorite part.
They love the animosity and the push and the pull.
Right. Now, does the camera affect that? I mean, of course, you guys know you're doing it for a television show. It's not really the equivalent of having courtroom cameras for a case. Does it affect things at all? Do you get feistier, do you think, for the cameras, or you're just going to make your arguments no matter what?
You don't even, for me, I don't even know the cameras are there. I haven't, even when I was doing trials and cases on the bench in New York City, when I would allow cameras in the courtroom. I was fond of doing that. I thought the public should know what's going on in the courtroom. I never realized that they were there. I would always just do whatever I was going to do. I mean, you're aware to some extent because of the light, but other than that, you can't change who you are. It's just impossible to do it because much of what you do is so spontaneous.
Right, and you are hashing out legal issues.
Yeah.
Is there a recent case that was one of your favorites or something that you just thought was so quirky and unusual that was a lot of fun?
There are so many quirky cases because the things that people do and say, they're not trained in any way. They're not lawyers. They have no legal background, and they love to present things. And we had a woman come in, and she was trying to show that the damage was damaged property, and in all the pictures, she was just posing. She was like the Vanna White of the show. She was so disheveled, and I said, these are pictures of you, and she goes, no, you could see back there. I mean, she was only concerned that she was going to get on the air, and those are enjoyable and they're fun, and people laugh at them. And I've had an individual, a defendant, come in, and he said, all I care about is that I'm getting to meet Judge DiMango, and so at the end I signed the verdict for him, and he lost. And everybody said to him, how do you feel about losing? He goes, I don't care. I have something that's going to be worth more in the end now than the money I would have gotten in this case if I didn't, So there are so many cute things that happen. And, even though the topics might be, common topics, rent, boyfriend, girlfriends, lending money, car accidents, dog bites, the people are characters, and they make the show.
Now that makes,
in any case.
That makes great TV, right?
It does.
And speaking of great TV, you guys started in 2014, right? So it's season 3
We
currently?
are in season 3. We were renewed for the 3rd season, so we're taping for season 3. Those shows will air sometime in September. And it's just terrific. We've had a great run,
And the ratings?
The ratings?
Good.
Excellent, really. I mean, Judy, us on the judge shows.
Right.
And so we are really we're doing well. We have like 3.5 million viewers. We're just doing terrific.
Right. Tough competition, too. You've got your Kelly and Michael.
Oh, yep. Kelly and Michael are opposite us, and we're doing, I think, well, hopefully now we're going to do even better. Yeah. Everything is going well.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Judge Judy, and you mentioned how she came about creating the show. And I understand that she picked you because she felt sort of a kinship. She felt that you were like her in some ways. You do have some things in common, right?
We have a lot of things in common, oddly enough. And I wonder sometimes if that's how things happen in life too, that there are so many coincidences that it almost becomes, it's like God's way of speaking almost and saying this is the way it's going to be. Well, when she was looking for a third person for the show, she said she wanted a New York judge. And so she called into New York. She has friends here. And she called into New York. And this is the story as she relates it to me. And said, I'm interested in finding someone like me, only younger. That's how she put it.
Okay.
And so when she called Dennis Quirk from the Court Officers Union. He goes, Judge, I got just the person for you, Judge DiMango. He said, call Judge DiMango. So she did. She called me and she said that, what about I be interested in auditioning, basically. Right. And the thing was, people would say to me all the time, you should have a show, because I had like a different kind of personality, I think, than most of the judges. And I would say, yeah, from your mouth to Judge Judy's ears, How
funny is that?
And then the call comes, and initially I was thinking, is this a joke? Because someone called first and said, I'm Judge Judy's executive producer. Would you have some time to speak with the judge today? He goes, this is not a joke.
Oh, I was going to say, and you're thinking, oh, come on.
I was
with
thinking.
The prank stuff.
Right. Because people would say so much. So I said, yeah, of course I'd be interested in speaking to her. And then shortly, within 7 or 8 minutes, the phone rings, and the voice at the end, that unmistakable voice, she says, do you know who this is? And I go, I do now. And she said, I'm putting the show together, etc. She told me that she called and she got this information. And she said, did you ever think about doing television? I said, yes, but, whoever thought it would happen? How would I get there? I'm sitting up there, resolving these matters all day long, trying cases.
Right.
I never thought that it would happen.
You didn't have an agent?
No, I never had an agent. I still don't have an agent, No, of course not. Although I don't know if people do, if they're interested in doing television, but I did not. It was not something I was. And so when I went there and auditioned, they said, fine, it's you.
That's great.
And here I am, sitting with you, sitting with all different people, talking on their shows. It's been an amazing ride.
So she wanted somebody from East Coast. You're from Brooklyn.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about growing up in Brooklyn. I read that as a teenager in Dyker Heights, you had a little flirtation with fame. You appeared in an ad.
That's actually very funny because my mother is very big on writing. She would always say, people always say negative things. But if you like something or someone is nice to you, you should say thank you. You should always say nice things.
Handwritten thank you notes,
yes.
Right?
I don't know if that even exists anymore.
I think it still does.
Although I have gotten some fan mail and I responded to them in writing. On a card. I write back.
I love that. Old school.
So she said she sent a letter to Maytag saying that she loved their products. Back then we had a dishwasher. And so they were thrilled about it, and they said, why don't you, can we come and can we take pictures of you for an ad and put it in Life magazine it was in. I mean, back then
that was huge.
Yeah.
That was the magazine.
I know, and we have a copy of it. My father had it framed and put in his dental office. And so they came and they set up, and we all stood at the dishwasher, and my mother said, this is the first and only time these kids have ever put any dishes in this dishwasher. we never had to do anything at home. As long as we studied, we were good. We didn't have to. She wasn't big on that. So that has appeared, and it memorializes the fact that when I was a kid, I did do some housework, that's about it.
That's great. You must have done a little bit more than a little bit. I saw you on Rachel Ray doing some cooking.
Yes,
you make a mean lasagna.
Yeah, we did. Cooking was a big thing, especially with my grandmother because she would, and my mother and my aunts. So I have always learned a little bit from something. My Aunt Dolly made pastry. My Aunt Antoinette did this. My mother did that, my grandmother, and combining all of this, it's something I love to do now. I do it as often as I can, although you would understand you've got to go out to eat quite often.
Right.
And it's a way for me to just relax, and people enjoy my food. I haven't killed anyone yet, so that's good. And that's pretty much interesting to talk about my mother. My mother and Judy have the same birthday.
And aren't your dads both dentists?
Her father, my father, a dentist. I mean, there were just so many, back to that other question, there were just so many things, but just that reminded me when we were talking about, just talking about Judy before.
The universe was definitely telling you to do this show. And also you mentioned, you know, as long as you studied hard, you know, you didn't have to do so many household chores. So you went to, I want to get this straight, Brooklyn College, right? Columbia for teaching degree, and St. John's Law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My master's at Columbia was in developmental psychology, and I stayed there for, I was actually going to do a second master's, and then I ended up going to law school. So I have some credits towards a second one as well.
I see. So was there a time when you said, lawyer, teacher, or?
Actually, it was when the government said to me, you're being laid off from teaching, get another job.
Oh, really?
You know,
okay.
And sort of, I would do some substitute teaching, I would do some tutoring.
In Brooklyn?
In Brooklyn,
Yeah.
everything. I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn. That's where my life was. It was in a pretty, you know, Italian-American neighborhood at the time, and of course, you know, things change, and so it's pretty...
Which neighborhood was it?
It was Dyker Heights.
It was Dyker Heights, okay.
Yeah. And so I went to, I loved psychology. That was really my passion, and my mother wanted me to be a teacher. She thought it was good if you would to come home, if you had children and a family, you could come home the same time as your kids, you know, so she sort of geared us that way. My dad would have loved it if I would have gone into dentistry, but I was just not cut out for that.
Not a science person.
Heck no, not blood, not anything. And so when I was laid off from teaching, I was home for a while, and then my father said, you know, we got to have a heart-to-heart talk, and he said, get a job or get out. And I said, okay, I think I should. How about school? Because they were very big on education, very big. And so I decided at the time, let me try to go back to school. And the only place I could go to back then without going back undergraduate was to law school. And so I applied. They gave you 3 schools for free at the time. I applied to 3. The first one I made was St. John's, and that's how I ended up in law school.
And then you wound up as a prosecutor, right?
Loved being a prosecutor.
How does that work? I mean, how do you decide, say, I'm going to be a prosecutor versus being a public defender or a defense attorney?
I think it's pretty much who you are and what comes from you, you know, and I don't think that you could spot a person who you think has that sort of more liberal, let me fight for the underdog mentality, and on the other hand, you have the more conservative, government-oriented, let me follow the rules kind of personality, which also is fighting for the underdog, the victim, and that was more the role I felt comfortable with. I felt more like I needed to be part of the fabric as opposed to the ones on the outside of it. And so I went into the Kings County District Attorney's Office, the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, and I was there for 5.5 years when a judge that I worked in front of, Judge Stephen Fisher, who was just a brilliant, brilliant man who passed on much too early in life, he asked if I was interested in applying. He was looking for a law secretary, and he thought that we would be a good balance because he was just so book-oriented and so bright, and I was more the people personality.
Right.
So I said, sure, and he interviewed a number of people, and then he asked if I would do it. And I wasn't looking to leave the DA's office at the time. You know, it's so funny because those are the things that have happened in my life. I wasn't looking to leave when I left. You know, when I had been moving up in the different places on the bench, I had become the administrative judge. When I was there, I had been a deputy bureau chief. And I made these decisions just hoping that they would put me in a better place. And they were risky when I did. So I went and worked with him, and he really taught me how to think legally and how to work with the law. He was just a brilliant man.
Now, 1995, right? Appointed by Rudy Giuliani as a judge in the criminal courts for the city of New York. Now, how does that come about? Does Giuliani hear about you?
It should be that easy. He looks around and goes, you know, how about you, Patricia? You interested in this? No, what actually has to happen is you put in an application, and it's a huge application. There are like 40 pages with all sorts of references and your legal background and your cases that you've done and lawyers that you've worked with. And out of thousands sometimes, they narrow it down and they narrow it down, and then you go through a series of different interviews with bar associations and people from the mayor's office, and I really wanted to be a judge. I mean, Bridget, that was the thing I wanted to do.
Why did you want it so much?
I just felt like when you're in a field, you want to be the top. And to me, being on the bench represented the highest level of achievement within this court system. And so I knew that when I knew I wanted to do criminal law, which was why I became a prosecutor, and I knew I wanted to be a judge. And so it was just, how do you get there? And you trying cases, working with judges, writing, working for the Bar Association, conducting seminars and lectures, and becoming well known in the legal community as someone who has, you know, a balance and is fair. That's how you do it. And ultimately, Mayor Giuliani appointed me, a little push with the Italian-American community too, because there were no Italian-American women ever to sit on that court.
You were the first.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other milestone, I guess, 2002, right?
Correct.
Elected as Justice of Supreme Court. I'm reading this because I want to get the
That's okay.
I want to get the correct information. Court of Kings County, Brooklyn.
That's correct.
In '02. All right. So you go there, and then maybe this was always true, but you had a lot of cases involving kids. True.
Yes.
A lot of tough cases.
They're heart-wrenching. Yeah. They're heart-wrenching because they're very difficult cases to prove, because just by virtue of the fact that these are children. And oftentimes they're children who are not even able to communicate and speak.
Right.
You know, the easiest victims are those that are slow, young, unable to speak, handicapped in some way. And so children, though I handled all criminal matters and felony matters in Brooklyn, any type, the Crimes Against Children Bureau in the District Attorney's Office, they focused all on certain cases, children under 12, let's say. All those cases appeared for the borough in front of me on a weekly basis.
During that time was the Nix-Mary
Brown.
That was a horrible case.
And it was, and it was touted as the child abuse case of the century, because this child was just so badly beaten and abused by the stepfather, Cesar Rodriguez, and it was also the mother, who was the defendant that I tried in the case, was indicted and tried on a theory of an omission to act, because she just sat there. You know, when you have a legal obligation to care for someone, a parent, a doctor, and a patient, your failure to do something when something should be done constitutes conduct that's punishable under the law. And she just let this man, and you know, she participated to some extent, but really it was about her letting him kill her.
And you look at the pictures of that little girl, just
the horrific.
Well, yeah, but the before pictures, just a little angel.
I know.
Now, in your role as a judge, this is what I always wonder about people in the legal profession. How do you go home and not think about that little girl?
I did. I thought about her a lot. I thought about her sometimes in the middle of the night. And, you know, the hardest part, of course, in any kind of judicial proceeding, no matter what it is keeping back your personal feelings. Because the truth is, you want the person who's responsible to be the one that pays for it in the end. So your personal feelings about who did it have no bearing on it. The court system has its checks and balances.
So
but
how
there
do you? How do
you
keep
really
them
do. You just
bay?
step back. You step back from it and you look at it from a very objective legal perspective. But I'm going to tell you, a case like that, when you saw how frightening her photographs were, how she looked with, you know, the raccoon eyes, it was just, I would wake up at night and think, you know, why does this have to happen to someone so young? And like you said, she was adorable. She was the cutest little girl who was really beaten to look like a monster.
It's hard to wrap your brain around.
It is. Even now, just even talking about it, I'm troubled by it. Yeah. But you hope that justice is done. We've done it the best we can within the court system, and the system is a tough, you know, it's overburdened. But, you know, I gave it every shot I had, and the mother is doing a substantial amount of jail, I must say, and so is the father.
Another high-profile case that actually got you some headlines was a young lady who was involved in an altercation over a singing competition, right? Wasn't it her name? Oh boy, Chasmia Morrison, 17-year-old. She came to the courtroom, an off-the-shoulder top, showing her tats, and you let her have it.
What's interesting is I'm all for dressing the way you'd like. You know, I was a little bit a little bit edgy even on the bench when I was dressing, but there are certain, you know, I wouldn't come here in a swimsuit, you know. So I tried to explain that to her, but the situation is that she was a troubled young lady. And you're right about the singing. These were 4 girls who decided that their good friend, who was one of the 4, they wanted her to win this singing competition. And so one of the other girls, not Ms. Morrison, put a lock in a sock and swung it at the competition's face. And so she couldn't, they fractured her jaw, she couldn't sing. Ms. Morrison did not do that and was just part of the group in a way that constituted, you know, legal acting in concert, but was not the main culprit, etc. And she was going to take a plea to an assault, and we were going to put her in some sort of program. And she came in the first day. When she was going to plead guilty, we go through certain questions to make sure that the person taking the plea understands the nature and consequences of what they're doing, is not drunk, has spoken to a lawyer. And I said to her, this was one of the first cases in the morning, and I said to her, are you under the influence of any drugs or alcohol? And she goes, yeah, just like that. I go, excuse me, did you understand that question? Because it was, you know, I said, are you under the influence now of any drugs or alcohol? And she goes, yeah. I said, what? She said, I smoke pot. I go, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. And I said to the lawyer, get her out. Because, you know, now I'm in a position, I can't take this plea from her. I don't know, I can't trust her mental capacity. Right. So she leaves. She comes back on this second day, and she's dressed with jeans that are ripped from top to bottom, with a top that was so off her shoulders, her bra straps, her tattoos. I mean, and I said to her, where do you think you're going? Do you think you're impressing me like this? You look like you're going to dating myself, you look like you're going to a disco. And unbeknownst to me, there were some newspaper people in the audience. And they wrote crime of fashion, you know, and they did this whole thing. Bottom line is, she was a troubled young lady, had no support from her mother. We put her in a program, and they moved her into with her aunt, because her mother, they had to get some psychiatric treatment for as well. And she started to do very well. She came in on another date with a beautiful white cotton top on, and I said, and now you look like a lady. And it was, you could see the transition happening with somebody monitoring her and staying on her.
You touched the lives of a lot of kids in your time. I found a poem. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
I do.
Are you ready for a weep fest?
Yeah.
Can I read it?
Sure.
Okay, this was in your office, and I think it is just the best example of how you have touched lives of these young defendants. And the poem reads, next to a woman so stern, I see a smile now and then. Some people call her mean, but I can see her as a friend. Once a boy filled with hatred and a heart filled with gloom, but through this I can bloom. Your Honor, you have made me bloom. I'm getting verklempt. This is too much.
Yeah.
You changed his life.
When he wrote this poem, and I can tell you a little background on it, I started to cry. And the court officers thought he did something to me. Oh. So they come up, is everything okay? And I said, and I just read it out into the audience. It was so beautiful. What happened with this young man is he was acting together with someone, and they had been charged with a robbery. And usually I say to people, what do you want to do with your life? Because he was a young kid. And I said, what do you want to do? And he said, I want to be a vet. And I said, how are you going to do that? And he gave me some information which made me, and he was well-spoken, and I said, you know what, this is a kid who really is sharp. And so I said to him, I want you in school. I mean, I would literally sentence people to school. I'd say, I want you in school. I'm going to check with the school, and they never believe you because nobody follows up with them. And so I would actually have my secretary, Anna, she would get on the phone. They all knew her by her first name because she'd say, you know, this is Anna from Judge DiMango's chambers, and we're checking on, and they loved it. The schools loved it as well, that there was somebody else doing this. And he promised me he was going to go, and I said, fine, if you do that, I'm going to give you probation, no problem. Youthful offender, you won't have a criminal record, etc. And his father was an interested parent. So he leaves, and then about a week later, the court officer says, Judge, remember that case you did? The father's here. He says, his son, they called from the school to say that he cut out. He swears he didn't, and he said, the only person that's going to get to the truth on this is you. So I said, oh, you know, now I'm in a bind. So anyway, I tell my secretary, go talk to him. Tell him if I call the school and he's lying, he's in trouble. And I didn't want to put a wedge between him and his father, because his father had given him up, basically, and my deal with him was he wouldn't get probation. So she said, the judge is a very fair person, but if you lie to her, you're going to have a problem. Did you go to school? And she said, please be honest. And so he said, I didn't. I cut out. So when we brought him up to the bench, I said, and I didn't want to put him in jail. I really wanted him to stay out. I didn't want to, and I said to him, what am I going to do with you? In my head, I'm thinking, what am I going to do with him? Right. And then I said, oh, next week is the Easter holiday, right? And he said, yeah. I said, you have school all week? He said, no, I don't. So I said, your punishment is you're going to sit up here at this bench with me every day. Just the way you're sitting with me now, he sat with me every day. I said, and if you're not here at 9:30, I'm going to have the officers bring you in. So he sat there every day, and on Friday he's writing and writing and writing, and this is the poem he wrote. And he never seen him again since. He just, I'm hoping to this day, I mean, as much as I could follow these, he was doing well, as was Chesmina for a while, and I'm just hoping he's in college now.
Maybe he's the lawyer.
Maybe
he's
he
going
is.
to law school.
Maybe he is. Maybe
Wouldn't
that's
that be
where I'm going to.
perfect?
Oh, it would really. It would just bring everything full circle.
Judge, so great having you here. You can catch the judge on Hot Bench, 9 o'clock, New York City, and get more of Judge Patricia DiMango. Thank you. I could talk to you for another 22 minutes.
I could talk to you for another 22 minutes as well. I mean, I drive my poor, publicist Gary Rosen crazy about him. I don't want to talk to for another 22 minutes.
Judge, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lovely having you here.
Thank you so much.